Video games have always been more than just entertainment for me. They're memories, journeys, and experiences that have shaped how I see gaming. From epic open worlds to emotional stories, these games left a lasting mark on me, and today I'm counting down my top 30 favorite video games of all time. This isn't about the most popular or the highest rated games. It's about the ones that I personally connected with, the ones that made me laugh, cry, or sit in awe at the screen. Whether it was coming home from school to play Vice City on my old PC, sneaking through the shadows as Ezio, or riding across the wild frontier with Arthur Morgan, each of these games means something special to me. So grab a seat, because we're diving into 30 unforgettable experiences that shaped my love for gaming. Let's get started. Starting off at number 30, we have Batman: Arkham Knight. What I loved most about this game was the atmosphere, the constant rain pouring over Gotham, and the neon reflections on the streets gave the city a dark, gritty vibe that pulled me right in. The free-flow combat was as smooth as ever, and chaining combos together against groups of thugs never got old. The Batmobile was a big addition here. Not perfect, but I had fun using it in high-speed chases and those intense tank battles. The story had its divisive moments, especially with the Arkham Knight reveal, but personally I still found it engaging. It gave closure to Rocksteady's trilogy while delivering some truly epic boss fights and emotional moments. For me, this game really captured what it feels like to be the Dark Knight, soaring over rooftops in the storm, using gadgets to outsmart enemies, and striking fear into Gotham's criminals. That's why Arkham Knight earns its place on my list. At number 29, I have Days Gone. This one really surprised me when I first played it. What stood out immediately was the world. Riding through the Pacific Northwest on Deacon's bike, with those dynamic weather changes and day-night cycles, made everything feel alive. One moment I'd be cruising under the sunset, and the next I'd be caught in heavy rain or a snowstorm, changing the whole mood of the ride. The combat had its ups and downs, but sneaking into camps, setting traps, and taking down hordes of freakers was incredibly satisfying, especially those moments when hundreds of them would come charging at you, and it turned into pure chaos. The bike itself felt like a character. Upgrading it, fueling it, and repairing it gave me that sense of survival. The story was a slow burn, but it grew on me, with some really emotional twists and solid character development for Deacon. It wasn't perfect, but for me, the mix of survival, atmosphere, and those unforgettable horde fights made Days Gone a game worth remembering. At number 28, I've got Marvel's Spider-Man. Honestly, this game made me feel like a kid again. Swinging through New York City never got old. The web-swinging mechanics were so fluid and natural that I often found myself taking the long way to missions just to enjoy the city's skyline. The way the sun would set across Manhattan, or the way the rain-slicked streets reflected the neon lights, really captured the atmosphere of Spidey's world. Combat was fast, flashy, and fun. Chaining web strikes, dodges, and gadgets together kept every fight exciting. I also really enjoyed how the story balanced Peter Parker's personal struggles with Spider-Man's responsibilities. The MJ and Miles segments weren't everyone's favorite, but they added to the overall narrative for me. And of course, that ending hit hard, emotional, impactful, and it left me excited for what Insomniac would do next. For me, Marvel's Spider-Man wasn't just another superhero game. It was one of the best interpretations of the character in gaming, and it reminded me exactly why I've always loved Spidey.
Available unit, possible Possible narcotics sale reported. Incident is active near Longacre. Over.
At number 27, I've got Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019. This reboot of the classic Modern Warfare series really impressed me with how grounded and intense it felt. From the very first mission, the game threw me into these gritty, realistic firefights where every shot carried weight. The night vision missions especially stood out. Sneaking through buildings in total darkness, clearing rooms with precision, it really felt like being part of a modern special ops team. The gunplay was some of the best in the series, smooth, impactful, and satisfying. Whether I was using an assault rifle, a sniper, or even just clearing corners with a shotgun. The campaign itself was surprisingly strong, with characters like Captain Price and Farah bringing depth to the story. Of course, multiplayer and Warzone expanded the experience, but for me, it was that single-player campaign that made this entry so memorable. It managed to bring back the intensity of the old Modern Warfare games while giving it a modern, realistic edge. That's why this one earns a spot on my list. At number 26, I've got Detroit, Become Human. This game hooked me because it felt less like a typical video game and more like I was shaping an interactive movie. What stood out the most was the choices. Every decision I made felt like it carried real weight, and seeing the branching story paths made me want to replay it just to see what could have happened differently. The characters were the heart of the game. Connor quickly became my favorite, with his detective work and evolving relationship with Hank. Kara's story was emotional, especially as she fought to protect Alice, and Marcus brought that revolutionary spark that gave the game such high stakes. The performances, the motion capture, and the writing made me genuinely care about their journeys. The futuristic Detroit setting, with its sleek designs and social tension between humans and androids, created a world that felt both believable and unsettling. By the end, I realized this wasn't just about androids, it was about humanity, morality, and survival. That's what made Detroit Become Human stick with me long after I finished it. At number 25, I've got Call of Duty World War II. What I liked most about this game was how it brought the series back to its roots. After years of futuristic settings and advanced movement, jumping into a gritty World War II campaign felt refreshing. The opening mission at Normandy, storming the beaches of D-Day, was intense and cinematic. Easily one of the most memorable openings in the franchise. The campaign really stood out for me because it focused on the brotherhood between soldiers. Following Daniels and his squad through Europe gave it that personal touch, and it reminded me of classic war movies. The atmosphere, the weapons, and the settings all felt authentic and immersive. Multiplayer was fun too, slower, more grounded, and more tactical compared to other Call of Duty games. It wasn't the flashiest entry in the series, but for me, World War II delivered a solid mix of historical authenticity and modern gameplay polish. That's why it still holds a place on my list. At number 24, I've got Metal Gear Solid V, The Phantom Pain. This game was different from most of the series, but I really enjoyed the open world approach. Sneaking through enemy bases, deciding whether to go in quiet or cause total chaos gave me so much freedom. The stealth mechanics were some of the best I've ever played. Tagging enemies, crawling through the grass, using distractions, and pulling off perfect infiltrations felt incredible. The variety of tools and companions also made the game stand out. Calling in D-Horse or D-Dog to help with missions or using the Fulton system to extract soldiers and gear gave the gameplay a unique flavor. The gunplay and movement were smooth, and every mission felt like it had a dozen different ways to approach it. The story was a bit messy compared to other Metal Gear games, but the gameplay more than made up for it. For me, the sense of freedom, the tactical creativity, and the feeling of pulling off a perfect stealth run are what made the Phantom Pain one of the most memorable experiences I've had in gaming. At number 23, I've got Elden Ring. This game absolutely blew me away with how massive and mysterious its world felt. Riding across the lands between on torrent, never knowing what I'd stumble across, gave me a sense of discovery I hadn't felt in years. One moment I'd be exploring a peaceful field, and the next I'd be ambushed by a towering boss that came out of nowhere. The combat was challenging, but in the best way. Every fight tested my patience and timing, and finally beating a boss after countless tries felt like such a huge reward. The freedom to build my character how I wanted, experiment with weapons, or even approach fights differently made the game feel personal to my playstyle. What stuck with me the most was the atmosphere. From haunting castles to eerie underground rivers, every area felt handcrafted and full of secrets. Elden Ring wasn't just a game, it was an adventure that constantly pushed me forward, and that's why it's one of my all-time favorites.
I am Melania, Blade of Mikola. And I have never known defeat.
At number 22, I've got Final Fantasy VII Remake. This one hit me with a mix of nostalgia and surprise. I grew up hearing about the original, so stepping into Midgar with modern visuals and hearing that legendary soundtrack reimagined gave me chills. What I loved most was how the game balanced fast-paced action with the strategy of classic Final Fantasy combat. Switching between characters mid-battle kept me on my toes, and every fight felt cinematic. Cloud, Tifa, Barrett, the whole cast had so much personality, and seeing their stories fleshed out made me care about them even more. But what really stood out was the emotional weight. The game knew when to slow down, let me breathe, and connect with the world and characters. Then ramp things up with epic boss fights and jaw-dropping set pieces. It's not just a remake, it's a full reimagining that made me fall in love with the story all over again. That's why it earns a solid spot on my list. At number 21, we've got Mafia 2. What really hooked me about this game was its focus on story and atmosphere. Set in the 1940s and 50s, Empire Bay felt alive with its snowy streets, old-school cars, and that classic soundtrack that instantly pulled me into the era. Unlike other open-world games, Mafia 2 didn't overload me with endless side activities. It was a more focused, cinematic experience, and I actually appreciated that. The story of Vito Scaletta, his rise, and the struggles of loyalty and betrayal really stuck with me. The gunplay was solid, the cover system worked well, and the driving felt weighty and authentic for the time period. And while it didn't have the sheer scale of something like GTA, what it did deliver was a tight, immersive narrative that made me feel like I was truly living through a gangster movie. For me, that's what makes Mafia 2 unforgettable and worthy of this spot on the list. At number 20, we have Assassin's Creed Syndicate. This game took us to Victorian London, and what I loved most was the atmosphere, the foggy streets, horse-drawn carriages, and the clash between the old world and the Industrial Revolution. Playing as Jacob and Evie Fry brought a fresh dynamic, since each had their own strengths, Jacob being more head-on and brawly, while Evie leaned into stealth and precision. The gang wars were a cool touch too, letting me feel like I was actually taking control of the city, one borough at a time. Combat was fast, brutal, and stylish, and traversing London with a rope launcher gave parkour a new speed that I really enjoyed. While Syndicate may not always get as much recognition as other Assassin's Creed titles, I personally had a great time with it. The setting, the dual protagonists, and the sense of leading a rebellion in London made it stand out as one of my favorite entries in the series. At number 19, we have The Last of Us Part 1. This game was more than just a survival story. It was an emotional journey that stuck with me long after I finished it. What really pulled me in was the relationship between Joel and Ellie, and how it slowly grew from cold distrust to something that felt like family. The world itself was brutal and unforgiving. Every encounter with the infected or human enemies felt tense, and every bullet I found felt valuable. I remember creeping through dark, abandoned buildings with barely a couple of supplies, my heart racing with every sound of a clicker nearby. But what I'll never forget are the quiet moments, the little conversations, the jokes from Ellie's pun book, or simply watching the two characters bond as they traveled across this broken America. The storytelling was raw, the performances were powerful, and the ending left me questioning what I would have done in Joel's place. For me, The Last of Us wasn't just a game, it was an experience, and one of the most impactful journeys I've ever played. At number 18, we have Far Cry 3. This was the game that really put the series on the map for me, and honestly, it's still one of the best open-world shooters I've ever played. Dropping me onto that tropical island and forcing me to survive felt thrilling. One moment I was hunting animals to craft gear, and the next I was sneaking into pirate camps, trying not to get spotted. The freedom to approach missions however I wanted, stealth with a bow or all-out chaos with guns blazing, never got old. But what truly made Far Cry 3 unforgettable was Voss. His performance and that famous definition of insanity monologue are etched into gaming history, and he remains one of the best villains I've ever faced. The story had its wild moments, sure, but the atmosphere of that island, beautiful yet deadly, kept me hooked from start to finish. Every firefight, every explosion, every tense stealth moment made me feel like I was constantly on edge. Far Cry 3 wasn't just a game about survival. It was about how far someone could go when pushed to the edge, and that's why it stands out as one of my favorites. At number 17, we have Batman Arkham Asylum, the game that kicked off one of the best superhero franchises in gaming history. This is where Rocksteady really nailed the formula. The free-flow combat system, the Predator-style stealth, and that incredible atmosphere inside Arkham itself. The Asylum felt claustrophobic, eerie, and alive, with Joker constantly taunting me over the PA system as I made my way deeper into the madness. What I loved most was how the game captured Batman's detective side. Scanning crime scenes, using gadgets, and piecing together clues made me feel like the world's greatest detective, not just a brawler. The boss fights, especially against characters like Scarecrow, really stood out too. Those nightmare sequences were creepy, surreal, and unforgettable. Even though later Arkham games expanded into massive open worlds, There's something special about the tight, focused design of Arkham Asylum. It was intimate, intense, and personal, and it set the standard for superhero games going forward. For me, this was the perfect beginning to Batman's modern gaming legacy, and it's why it still holds a special place in my list. At number 16, we have Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. Now this one was special because it wasn't just an Assassin's Creed game. It was a full-on pirate adventure. Sailing across the Caribbean, commanding my ship, and hearing my crew break into sea shanties made me forget the main story half the time because I just wanted to explore. The naval combat was the real highlight for me. Upgrading the Jackdaw, taking on enemy ships, and boarding them in the middle of the ocean was thrilling every single time. I also loved diving into underwater shipwrecks, hunting sharks, and exploring islands. It felt like there was always something new to discover. As for Edward Kenway, he wasn't the typical assassin at first, more of a rogue chasing fortune. But watching his journey from selfish pirate to someone caught in the Creed's struggles made the story surprisingly impactful. For me, Black Flag was the most fun Assassin's Creed has ever been. It blended open-world exploration, naval combat, and classic assassin gameplay into something unforgettable. It wasn't just about stealth and hidden blades. It was about living the pirate life, and that's why it stands tall in my list. At number 15, we have God of War 3, one of the most brutal and cinematic action games I've ever played. This game picked up right where God of War 2 left off, with Kratos leading the Titans up Mount Olympus. And from that very first battle against Poseidon, I knew I was in for something epic. The scale of this game was unbelievable. Fighting gods like Hades, Hercules, and Zeus wasn't just about combat. It felt like every boss fight was a massive cinematic event. And the game didn't hold back on brutality either. Kratos was at his most ruthless here, and some of those finishing moves are still burned into my memory. I also loved the puzzles and platforming elements that broke up the action. The weapons, like the Blades of Exile and the Claws of Hades, made combat feel varied and satisfying. And the visuals, for the time, were jaw-dropping, especially in how they captured the grand, mythological setting of Olympus. God of War 3 was the ultimate conclusion to Kratos' original saga, closing the chapter on his vengeance against the gods in the most explosive way possible. It was raw, intense, and larger than life, exactly what a God of War finale should be. At number 14, we have Grand Theft Auto, Vice City, a game that oozes style, nostalgia, and pure 80s vibes. From the moment I first heard that neon-soaked soundtrack while cruising through the streets in a sports car, I knew this game was something special. What I loved most was the setting. Vice City felt alive with its bright beaches, flashy nightlife, and that perfect mix of chaos and glamour. It wasn't just about causing mayhem, it was about living out a full-blown 80s crime drama. Playing as Tommy Vercetti, climbing your way up from small-time jobs to becoming the kingpin of the city, gave the story this addictive sense of progression. And then there's the nostalgia factor. I still remember coming back from school, rushing to boot it up on my old Windows PC, and losing myself for hours. Just seeing that pink and blue logo pop up on the screen was enough to make me happy. It wasn't just a game. It was the game of that era for me, and it became an icon of my childhood. The soundtrack deserves its own spotlight, blasting songs from artists like Michael Jackson while driving down Ocean Beach at sunset, was unforgettable. It's one of those rare games where the music, the world, and the gameplay all click together perfectly. For me, Vice City wasn't just a game, Mao. It was an experience, a piece of my childhood, and it made me feel like I was starring in my own 80s gangster movie. It's a game I'll never forget. At number 13, we have Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, the game that took everything great about Assassin's Creed 2 and expanded it in the best way possible. What stood out most for me was how it kept Ezio's story going, dropping us right into Rome, a massive, beautiful city full of history, secrets, and opportunities. What I really loved was how Ezio himself evolved here. In Assassin's Creed 2, he was young and vengeful, but in Brotherhood, we see him take on the weight of responsibility. He wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. He was protecting Rome, guiding a new generation of assassins, and truly becoming a leader. That growth made him one of my favorite protagonists in gaming. The villains in this game also made it stand out. The Borgia family, especially Cesare Borgia, was such a menacing presence. Cesare wasn't just another Templar. He was ambitious, ruthless, and determined to bend all of Rome to his will. Going up against him made every mission feel like a step in a bigger war, and it gave the story real urgency. Rome itself became a character too. The struggle between the oppressed people and the corrupt Borgia rule added so much weight to Ezio's mission. Rebuilding the city while dismantling the Borgia's control felt like I was restoring hope to Rome itself. For me, Brotherhood wasn't just another Assassin's Creed game. It was Ezio at his best, facing one of the most compelling villains in the series. That combination of strong character development, powerful antagonists, and an unforgettable setting is what makes it so high on my list. At number 12, we have Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, a game that defined an entire era of gaming for me. This wasn't just another GTA. It felt bigger, crazier, and more ambitious than anything that came before it. The moment I stepped into CJ's shoes and returned to Grove Street, I knew this was going to be something special. What really stuck with me was the sheer scale of the game. You weren't just confined to one city. You had 3 massive ones, plus the countryside, deserts, and mountains to explore. It felt endless at the time. Whether it was flying planes, gambling in Las Venturas, or riding a bike down Grove Street, there was always something to do. The story of CJ was another highlight. His journey from a guy returning home to protect his family and rebuild Grove Street, to getting caught up in the chaos of crime, betrayal, and survival was unforgettable. Characters like Big Smoke and Ryder added so much personality, and those plot twists, legendary. For me, San Andreas also carries a huge nostalgia factor. I still remember those long evenings after school, booting it up on my PC, using cheat codes just to mess around, or spending hours listening to the radio stations while cruising through Los Santos. It wasn't just a game, it was a playground of possibilities that gave me countless memories. At number 11, we have Resident Evil 2 Remake, a game that reminded me why I fell in love with survival horror in the first place. Capcom didn't just remaster the original, they completely rebuilt it from the ground up, and the result was one of the most terrifying yet satisfying experiences I've ever played. The atmosphere was incredible. The Raccoon City Police Department felt like a character in itself. Dark hallways, flickering lights, and that constant tension of not knowing what's lurking around the corner. Every step I took felt heavy, every creak made me cautious, and every door I opened came with a little bit of dread. The gameplay balance between action and survival horror was perfect. Conserving ammo, managing inventory, and deciding whether to fight or avoid enemies kept me on edge. And of course, there was Mr. X, stomping through the halls, hunting me down. The first time I heard his heavy footsteps behind me, my heart sank. That level of tension never let up. I also loved how the game gave us two perspectives, Leon and Claire, each with their own campaigns. It made the story richer and kept me coming back for more. The mix of nostalgia from the original with modern graphics and mechanics made it feel both familiar and brand new. For me, Resident Evil 2 Remake wasn't just a great horror game. It was proof that a remake can surpass the original while still honoring it. It's one of the finest survival horror experiences I've ever played, and that's why it earns such a high spot on my list. At number 10, I've placed Hitman, Absolution, a game that gave me some of the most stylish stealth gameplay I've ever experienced. While some fans of the series debated its shift toward a more cinematic, story-driven approach, for me, it was the perfect blend of stealth, action, and storytelling. What I loved most was the freedom of choice. Every mission felt like a puzzle, and I could approach it however I wanted, disguise myself as a janitor, slip past unnoticed, or go in guns blazing, though the latter usually didn't end well. The thrill of silently taking out a target, hiding in plain sight, and walking away like nothing happened was unmatched. The atmosphere was phenomenal. From grimy nightclubs to quiet suburban neighborhoods, every level felt alive and detailed. And then there was Agent 47 himself, cool, calculated, and ruthless. Playing as him made me feel like a true professional assassin. Now, I know many Hitman fans may not like Hitman, Absolution. They prefer Blood Money or the classic Hitman trilogy. And don't get me wrong, I've played all of them, and they're great games. But for me, Absolution is the masterpiece. It's very underrated. People criticize it, but I absolutely love it. For me, it wasn't only about stealth, it was about the atmosphere, the story, the background music, and how every mission felt like it was telling a piece of a larger narrative. It was a story of vengeance, of Hitman's inner conflict, and it played out across diverse, living cities. Honestly, the whole experience felt like I was inside a Quentin Tarantino film, from the vibrant colors to the gritty tone, from the tense action to the stylish presentation. The soundtrack added another layer of cinematic weight that pulled me deeper into 47's world. For me, this wasn't just a stealth game. It was a movie I could play, like one that made me slow down, take it all in, and really feel the role of Agent 47. That's why, despite what others say, Hitman, Absolution remains one of my favorite stealth games ever, and it firmly deserves its place at number 10 on my list. At number 9, we have Uncharted 4, A Thief's End, the perfect conclusion to Nathan Drake's incredible journey. From the very first chapter, it was clear this game was something special, bigger, more emotional, and more cinematic than ever before. What stood out most for me was the story. After years of treasure hunting, near-death escapes, and impossible adventures, this was Drake's most personal chapter yet. His relationship with Elena and his brother Sam gave the game a real emotional weight, grounding all the action with genuine human drama. It wasn't just about lost treasure this time. It was about family, loyalty, and figuring out when to finally walk away. The game's set pieces were jaw-dropping, even by Uncharted standards. From intense shootouts to breathtaking chase sequences, every moment felt like it was pulled straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster. That Madagascar car chase, still one of the most thrilling sequences I've ever played. But what I loved just as much were the quieter moments, exploring old ruins, solving puzzles, and listening to the banter between Drake, Elena, and Sully reminded me why this series is so special. It wasn't only about the action, it was about the journey and the people along the way. The antagonist, Rafe Adler, was also one of the most compelling in the series. His rivalry with Nathan, fueled by greed and obsession, added a constant tension that carried through to the unforgettable finale. For me, Uncharted 4 wasn't just the end of a story. It was the celebration of everything that made the series great. Adventure, danger, humor, and heart, all wrapped into one final ride. It left me both satisfied and nostalgic, and it's a game I'll always look back on as the perfect send-off for Nathan Drake. At number 8, we have The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt, a game that completely redefined what an open-world RPG could be. From the moment I stepped into Geralt's boots, I realized this wasn't just another fantasy RPG. It was something much deeper. The world was massive, but unlike other games where big maps can feel empty, here every path, village, and forest had a story to tell. What I loved most was the storytelling. The main quest, chasing after Ciri while dealing with the Wild Hunt, was epic, emotional, and full of weighty decisions. But the side quests, they're what made the game legendary for me. I remember the Bloody Baron storyline. It felt more meaningful and emotional than most full campaigns in other games. And it wasn't just that quest, countless smaller stories, from helping peasants haunted by monsters to deciding the fate of towns, pulled me in. On the gameplay side, what stood out was the preparation. This wasn't a game where you could just charge in swinging. I had to think like a witcher, researching monsters, brewing potions, applying oils, and choosing the right bombs and signs before a fight. Facing a griffin, a vampire, or a Leshen wasn't just about combat. It was about strategy and learning their weaknesses. That's what made every encounter memorable. Then there were the upgrades, improving Geralt's armor, finding Witcher gear sets, unlocking new abilities through the skill tree. It always felt like I was progressing and evolving, not just leveling up for the sake of it. And of course, I can't skip the DLCS. Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine weren't just add-ons. They felt like full new games. Hearts of Stone gave us a dark, twisted fairy tale with Olgierd and Gaunter O'Dim, who's still one of the best villains I've ever seen in gaming. And Blood and Wine? It was a love letter to the fans, a gorgeous new region, Toussaint, with an almost fairy tale feel, but still full of danger. It was the perfect send-off for Geralt's story. For me, The Witcher 3 wasn't just about finishing quests. It was about living in that world. From riding Roach through the fields of Velen to playing hours of Gwent, it's a game that kept pulling me back even after the credits rolled. To this day, it's one of the most complete and unforgettable RPG experiences I've ever had. At number 7, I have Resident Evil 7, Biohazard, a game that completely reinvented the Resident Evil series while still staying true to its survival horror roots. After the more action-heavy direction of Resident Evil 5 and 6, this game brought horror back in a way that felt raw, personal, and downright terrifying. What grabbed me right away was the first-person perspective. It made everything so much more immersive, and honestly, so much scarier. Exploring that creepy Baker family house, every creaking floorboard and flickering light kept me on edge. It wasn't just about fighting monsters. It was about surviving in this claustrophobic, hostile environment where danger felt like it was lurking around every corner. The Baker family themselves were unforgettable. Jack Baker especially, the way he stalked you through the house, taunting you, breaking through walls like it was nothing. It felt like he was always one step ahead. The family dinner scene at the beginning is still one of the most disturbing and memorable openings in gaming for me. Each member of the Bakers brought their own twisted brand of horror, and facing them was as much psychological as it was physical. The atmosphere was the real star here. That decaying, mold-infested house with its tight hallways, locked doors, and disgusting details made me constantly uneasy. It felt like the house itself was alive, a character just as terrifying as the family inside it. Add to that the limited ammo, the resource management, and the need to carefully pick your battles, and it brought back the classic survival horror tension that made Resident Evil famous in the first place. For me, Resident Evil 7 wasn't just a comeback for the series. It was proof that horror games could still genuinely scare me. It blended atmosphere, story, and gameplay so well that even after finishing, the memory of being hunted in that house stuck with me. It's one of the scariest and most unforgettable games I've ever played. At number 6, I have Ghost of Tsushima. This game felt less like I was just playing and more like I was living through a samurai epic. From the moment I stepped onto the island of Tsushima, I was blown away by its beauty, rolling fields of red and yellow leaves, bamboo forests swaying in the wind, and sunsets that looked like moving paintings. It's honestly one of the most cinematic games I've ever played. What I loved most was the samurai combat. The one-on-one standoffs were pure adrenaline, that tense moment waiting for your enemy to strike, then cutting them down in a single decisive blow. Every sword clash felt sharp, weighty, and deadly. Learning new stances, mastering parries, and pulling off perfectly timed counters gave the combat so much depth, but it always stayed stylish and satisfying. The story of Jin Sakai also stuck with me. His struggle between honor and survival, following the way of the samurai or becoming the ghost, added real emotional weight to the journey. I wasn't just fighting Mongols. I was constantly questioning what kind of warrior and what kind of man Jin would become. And then there were the little things I'll never forget, following foxes to shrines, composing haikus, or quietly riding through fields as petals blew in the wind. Even exploration felt peaceful, almost meditative in between the intense battles. For me, Ghost of Tsushima wasn't just a game, it was an experience. A love letter to samurai films, to Japanese culture, and to the idea of honor itself. That's why it stands so high on my list. At number 5, I have God of War. This game completely redefined what the series was for me. I went in expecting the brutal, over-the-top, hack-and-slash action that the older games were known for. And while the combat was still incredible, what really surprised me was the heart of the story. The father-son journey between Kratos and Atreus gave the game so much emotional depth. Seeing Kratos, a character who was once all about rage and destruction, now struggling to guide and protect his son, was something I didn't expect to hit me so hard. Their relationship grew with every step of the journey, and by the end, it felt like I had gone through that growth with them. The combat was a highlight too. The Leviathan axe is hands down one of the most satisfying weapons I've ever used in a game. The way it felt to throw it, hear it crunch into an enemy, and then call it back like Thor's hammer never got old. And switching between axe combat, bare-handed strikes, and Atreus' bow added so much variety. Every fight felt weighty and intense. The world itself was stunning. Exploring realms from Norse mythology, solving puzzles, fighting trolls, and uncovering secrets made every moment worth slowing down for. I also loved how the game felt almost seamless. The entire story played out in a single continuous shot without cuts, which made me feel even more immersed in Kratos and Atreus' journey. For me, God of War 2018 wasn't just a great action game. It was a powerful story about family, growth, and learning to carry the weight of the past. That mix of emotional storytelling and brutal combat is what makes it one of my all-time favorites. At number 4, I have Resident Evil 4. This is the game that completely changed survival horror for me, and honestly, for the entire gaming industry. It struck the perfect balance between tense horror and fast-paced action, creating an experience that was thrilling from start to finish. Playing as Leon Kennedy on that mission to rescue the president's daughter felt like stepping into a non-stop roller coaster. The pacing was perfect. One moment I was carefully conserving ammo, listening to the eerie sounds of villagers in the distance, and the next I was in all-out survival mode, fighting off hordes with every bullet counting. The over-the-shoulder camera might seem standard today, but back then it was revolutionary. It made the combat feel so much more immersive and precise, and it influenced countless games that came after. The shooting, the quick decision-making, the way enemies reacted to being hit, it all felt so fluid and satisfying. And of course, I can't forget the iconic moments. That first village fight where the chainsaw enemy appears still gives me chills. The creepy cult, the castle sections, fighting giant monsters. It was packed with unforgettable set pieces. Every area felt unique, and the game never lost its momentum. For me, Resident Evil 4 is more than just a great game. It's a landmark. It set a new standard for action horror, and even today, replaying it still gives me the same rush. That mix of atmosphere, tight gameplay, and legendary moments is why it's so high on my list. At number 3, I have Grand Theft Auto 5. This game was an absolute game changer for me when it came to open world experiences. Los Santos felt alive in a way few games have ever matched. From the busy streets to the quiet countryside, it was a playground where anything could happen. What really stood out was the 3-character system. Switching between Michael, Franklin, and Trevor wasn't just a gimmick. It gave me completely different perspectives on the story and on the city itself. Michael with his midlife crisis and heist expertise, Franklin chasing that climb from the streets to the high life, and Trevor was just pure chaos. Each one brought something unique, and their interactions made the narrative so much more engaging. The heists were my favorite part of the game. Planning them out, choosing different approaches, and then pulling them off felt cinematic every single time. And outside of the main missions, there was always something new to do, then whether it was racing, messing with the stock market, or just causing mayhem to see how long I could last against the cops. The freedom in GTA V is what kept me coming back. I'd log in, planning to do one mission, and end up spending hours just exploring or fooling around. Add to that GTA Online, which basically became its own world. And it's no wonder this game is still going strong years after release. For me, GTA V isn't just one of the best open-world games ever made. It's one of those games where the stories you create for yourself are just as memorable as the ones Rockstar wrote. That's why it holds such a special place on my list. At number 2, I have The Last of Us Part 2. This is one of the most emotional and honestly divisive games I've ever played. For me, though, it was unforgettable. A brutal, heartbreaking journey that stuck with me long after the credits rolled. What hit me hardest was the storytelling. The game didn't hold back. It forced me to confront loss, anger, and revenge in ways most games don't dare to. Playing as Ellie, seeing her spiral deeper into rage, and then unexpectedly switching perspectives to Abby was such a bold move. At first I hated it, but as the game went on, I started to understand Abby's side too, and that shift completely changed how I viewed the story. The gameplay made it all even more intense. Every encounter felt raw and desperate, sneaking through ruined buildings, crafting on the fly, or getting caught in brutal fights. The animations, the sound design, even the way enemies called each other's names when one died, it all added weight to every single moment. But beyond the violence, what really stuck with me was how human the game felt. It showed how grief and revenge can consume someone, and how forgiveness is the hardest path of all. By the end, I wasn't just playing a game. I was questioning how I would act in those situations, and that's something very few games have ever made me do. For me, The Last of Us Part 2 isn't just a favorite. It's a story I'll never forget. Painful, powerful, and deeply personal. It's one of those rare games that leaves a mark on you forever. At number 1, I have Red Dead Redemption 2. If I had to crown just one game as my ultimate favorite, it would be this one. This isn't just a game, it's an emotional journey that feels more like living another life. From the first moment you ride out of the snowy mountains with Dutch's gang, you're drawn into a living, breathing world. The open world is unmatched. Towns bustling with life, strangers you can help or ignore, dynamic encounters that make every ride unpredictable, and the sheer beauty of the landscape that constantly makes you stop and stare. But the real heart of the game is Arthur Morgan. His story is one of loyalty, regret, redemption, and the slow realization of what truly matters. You feel his struggles as the Van der Linde gang begins to crumble, and every choice you make carries weight, shaping Arthur's legacy in the end. The way the game balances massive open-world freedom with one of the most personal, heartbreaking narratives I've ever experienced is something special. Spoiler alert here. After spending so many hours living as Arthur, going through his journey, it was crushing to see him slowly fade and eventually die. That moment left me genuinely depressed, like I had lost a part of myself. But then, stepping into John Marston's boots in the epilogue gave me a second wind. Hunting down Micah Bell, the man who betrayed the gang, was incredibly satisfying. The final standoff, with American Venom playing in the background, was one of the most cathartic and unforgettable moments I've ever had in gaming. It's not just about the gunfights, the robberies, or even the open world exploration. It's about the quiet moments too. Sitting by a campfire, fishing by the river, or watching the sun set over the plains as Arthur reflects on his life. By the time the credits rolled, I wasn't just finishing a game, I felt like I was saying goodbye to a friend. That's why Red Dead Redemption 2 sits at the very top of my list. It's the perfect blend of freedom, storytelling, and raw emotion, an unforgettable masterpiece that defines what gaming can truly be. And that wraps up my list of the top 30 games that left the biggest mark on me. From stealth adventures and survival horror to emotional open world epics, each one gave me something unforgettable. Whether it was heart-pounding gameplay, mind-blowing worlds, or stories that stayed with me long after the credits rolled. For me, games aren't just entertainment, they're experiences, almost like another life you get to live. Some made me laugh, some frustrated me, some even made me emotional, but all of them reminded me why I fell in love with gaming in the first place. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining me on this journey through my favorite titles. I'd love to know your top games too. Drop them in the comments because everyone's list is different. And that's what makes gaming so amazing. And finally, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gaming breakdowns, deep dives, and personal favorites. This has been my ultimate countdown, but the best part of gaming is that the journey never really ends. Until next time, keep playing, keep exploring, and keep living the stories that games have to offer